So this guy goes into his dentist's office because he's got something wrong going on in his mouth. After a brief examination, the dentist exclaims, "My goodness, that plate I installed in your mouth about 6 months ago has nearly completely corroded. What on earth have you been eating?" "Well, the only thing I can think of is that my wife made me some asparagus about 4 months ago with this stuff on it. Hollandaise sauce, she called it. And doctor, I'm talking delicious. I've never tasted anything like it, and ever since then, I've been putting it on everything. Meat, fish, toast, vegetables, you name it. It's got hollandaise sauce on it." "Well, that's probably it," said the dentist. "Hollandaise sauce is made with lemon juice, which is acidic and highly corrosive. It seems as though I'll have to install a new plate, one made out of chrome this time." "Why chrome?" the man asked. "Well, everyone knows that there's no plate like chrome for the hollandaise." Little Christmas humor there, and some of you are saying very little humor. Christmas is probably one of the most loved observances of the year. We love the decorations. We love the lights. We love the goodwill. We love the family gatherings. We love the gift giving. Still, there can be some things which are unpleasant which come into our Christmas traditions. Take the area of gift giving, for instance. I love giving gifts to the people I love, trying to find a way to express my love in the things that I carefully select for each person. I do remember, though, one Christmas where the giving didn't produce joy. The family I grew up in got to be quite large. I was the second oldest of 8 kids. That means that there were 10 people in our household, and we had one income, which got distributed to all of us, which meant at Christmas time, we couldn't afford to give gifts to everybody. And so when the family got that large, we started doing our Christmas exchange. We started selecting, each one of us would get one name of some other family member, and we would buy them one special gift. They might get a gift as well from my parents, and maybe even one from Santa, but you know, they got one major gift, and that was from the person who got their name in the gift exchange. Well, this year I'm talking about, I had gotten the name of my little brother, Kevin. And I puzzled about what my little brother might want for a while. I searched out the stores for over a month. Every Saturday, our family would go in for shopping in town, so I was looking for a long time. And I thought I had finally arrived at something my brother would like. Now, you got to remember, this was back before the video games or any of the fancy things kids play with today. But there was a game, a football game, that you plugged in, and you arranged the little plastic pieces, and when you flipped it on, the vibration in the board caused the pieces to move. So you're playing against somebody else. They're arranging defense, you're arranging offense. You're trying to figure out when these things vibrate, which way they're going to go, and how to get your ball carrier towards the end zone. You know, I thought, he's probably going to like this. You know, it's a fancy game. He doesn't have anything like this. Well, I was surprised when I looked at him opening his gift on Christmas morning that he didn't seem jubilated by what he opened there. And in fact, that afternoon on Christmas Day, he told me he didn't like the gift I got him. He wondered what was in my mind in picking such a gift for him. And I was heartbroken. I was thinking the one gift I had to give, and he didn't like it. You know, it just really sat badly with me for a long time. Now my brother Kevin was young, and my brother Kevin tends to speak his mind anyway. So, you know, it wasn't like he was way out of bounds or deliberately being mean in what he said. He was just Kevin being Kevin. And I was disappointed that I didn't give him a gift that he wanted. You know, that's the trouble with gift giving. risk your gift being rejected. That's even true with the gifts that God would give us. They are subject to the receiver's rejection. It's sadly true that you can't please everyone. As we find in our text this morning, as we continue to take our messages from 1 Samuel. Our text this morning is 1 Samuel chapter 10, verses 24 through 27. And there we find these words. Samuel said to all the people, "Do you see him whom the Lord has chosen? Surely there is no one like him among all the people." So all the people shouted and said, "Long live the king." Then Samuel told the people the ordinances of the kingdom and wrote them in the book and placed it before the Lord. And Samuel sent all the people away, each one to his own house. Saul also went to his house at Gibeah, and the valiant men whose hearts God had touched went with him. But certain worthless men said, "How can this one deliver us?" And they despised him and did not bring him any present, but he kept silent. I want you to see, first of all, in our text this morning, that some gladly received him. When Saul was presented to the people to be their king, he was greeted with a great deal of joy on that announcement. After all, they were the ones that had insisted that they should have a king all over them, almost demanded to have a king. And Saul was the fulfillment of that desire for them. They wanted to have a king to keep up with the nations around them. They wanted to have a king that was going to lead them onto the battlefield. They wanted a king to show off to the other nations, someone to impress the peoples around them. Now, Saul was just the sort of man that they had imagined when they had asked for a king. He was tall, and he was exceedingly handsome. So we see Samuel displaying the new king with the words, "Do you see him whom the Lord has chosen? Surely there's no one like him among all the people." Yeah, Saul looked different than everybody else. He was obviously a man of distinction. 1 Samuel chapter 9, verse 2, if we go back to that part, says of him, Saul was a choice and handsome man, and there was not a more handsome person than he among the sons of Israel. From his shoulders and up, he was taller than any of the people. There you got it. The best looking man in the kingdom, and standing tall, a full head and shoulders above anyone else in the kingdom. And so, upon his presentation to the people, they lifted up their voices in eager welcome. All the people shouted and said, "Long live the king." Yeah, this is just what we had in mind. He looks good. You know, they're ready to have Saul as king. In this Christmas season, let us remember the coming of another king, Jesus, who also was gladly received. So we would expect when we consider that he was our first and best Christmas gift. How does John 3:16 start? For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. Jesus was God's gift to us, God's love gift to us. God so loved the world that he gave us his one and only Son. He was the one and only one who could answer our greatest need. Sin had estranged us from God and condemned us to death. And only in Jesus did man have any hope against sin. He was the object of man's longing. Man had been waiting for him to appear for centuries. From the time that sin first entered into the picture, when Adam first chose to sin, we have the promise of the Messiah which is going to come. And from that time, throughout the Old Testament period, the prophets and the patriarchs and the psalmist had been writing of the king who would come and establish God's kingdom forever. So Job cried out in the time of his severe trials, I know that my Redeemer lives and that he will stand someday on this earth. Man was looking forward to the Messiah. And so we find at the opening of the New Testament, all of God's people were looking for and anxiously awaiting with longing the Messiah, the Christ, which was to come, the one that was going to deliver them. And as that longing was fulfilled with the birth of Jesus, some gladly opened their hearts to him. The shepherds, on the night of his birth, left their flocks to see the one whom the angel had announced. And they returned from that place proclaiming the king that was born, gladly telling of him to anyone that would listen. Presented at the temple when he was only a bit over a week old. Both Simeon and Anna, who had each of them eagerly been waiting the Messiah, had rejoiced when they saw this tiny baby and recognized in him the one who was the fulfillment of that promise. In Jesus' ministry, on one occasion, there were so many people who were trying to crowd into the home where Jesus was at that they could not shove another person through the door. They were packed like sardines in that place, so much so that the friends of a man that desperately needed Jesus' healing touch had to take him up to the roof and dig a hole through the ceiling and lower him down to Jesus. That's how eagerly his word was being received at the time. Another occasion, Jesus was teaching at the shore of the Sea of Galilee. And when he finished his message, he got onto the fishing boat and they set sail across that gigantic lake. And the people who had just heard from Jesus were so anxious to hear more from him that they ran all the way around that huge body of water and met him on the other side. Everywhere Jesus went, there were crowds. There were people who wanted to see him and listen to him and touch him if they could. That's how anxiously people were accepting the Lord in that day. And so it has been in every age that there are some who eagerly receive him. Even after he departed this world, some have accepted him as soon as they've heard of him. In the New Testament record, we have conversions like that, several conversions which are recorded, like the Ethiopian official and like that of the Philippian jailer and his family. We have those instances where the people are hearing of Jesus for the first time and want right then and right there to receive him. Here's water. What hinders me from being baptized? There are people who are anxiously and eagerly awaiting to greet the Lord. And it's been so in every age since then. And so today, some still come to him eagerly when they discover who he is. But there's another part in our text that I want you to see this morning. Others rejected him. You'd think with Israel demanding a king and Saul being just what they had been wanting, that everyone would welcome him. Instead, we find out that there's always some that won't be satisfied. You can't please everyone. Instead of reacting as the rest of the nation at the announcement of Saul as king, these men chose to heckle him. Our text speaks of them as worthless men who questioned his ability to deliver them. They spurned him. They refused to give him a gift as was expected of all the people over whom he would rule. They just callously rejected him, even though he was God's choice to be their king. Just as King Saul had those who opposed him from the very beginning, so the Lord, whose birth we celebrate in this season, had those who opposed him. Just as the shepherds had gladly welcomed the Messiah, just as the Magi came over a long distance to be able to give him expensive gifts and worship him, so there was another, King Herod, that when he heard of his birth, wanted to destroy him and made every effort to do so. When Jesus entered into his ministry, he soon had many who would have him to be king, but there were also the religious leaders, the scribes and the Pharisees, who did everything they could to oppose him, everything they could to trip him up. And they were frustrated in that event, so they even plotted his death and paid someone to betray him. For all these throngs of people eager to receive what Jesus had to offer, there was this other group that didn't want anything to do with him and wanted to reject him. And as we speak of the opposition, we should note that Jesus didn't come to please everyone. If Jesus wanted to, he could have had a larger following. If Jesus wanted to, he could have pleased a lot more people. He could have toned it down a little bit and taken off the sharper edges of the gospel that he was sharing, and people would have been more willing to receive a gospel that didn't convict them. He could have practiced good politics. Now, I want to explain to you, as I go into this section of my message, that I wrote this before the death of George Bush this last week. Jesus could have practiced good politics. I remember George Bush, who was president, wouldn't proceed with a war in the Gulf until he could cobble together a coalition of nations willing to go with him. He wanted to appease his critics. He wanted to diffuse the criticism people were ready to heap upon him by saying everybody else is going with us. It's not just us, but everybody else is going to go with us. He wasn't willing to do what needed to be done in that situation until it was more politically pleasing for him to do that. Jesus could have done that. Jesus could have been more shrewd to appease his enemies and get them on his side. He could have effusively praised the Pharisees and the Sadducees every time a crowd gathered, told the people what wonderful people these leaders were. Would you stand up, Pharisees, Sadducees? Look at them. Aren't they wonderful people? Give them a good hand here. Jesus could have been like that, glad-handing and praising and lifting up the people that wanted to oppose him so that they would be more eager to be on his side. But instead, he calls them a brood of vipers and whitewashed tombstones and things that they didn't really want to hear. He says things about their hypocrisy that they didn't want to hear. And so they were no friend of Jesus. Jesus presented the truth without trying to disguise it. He accepted the fact that many would reject him in preaching such a controversial truth, that the majority would go on the broad way leading to destruction and only a narrow few would follow him to salvation. He knew that even those who followed him would face persecution because they had rejected him. They would reject his followers. He knew that the gospel that he had given them to proclaim would divide families, and a man's enemies will be the members of his household. It will divide a father from the son. And you know how that passage goes. He knew the divisive nature of the truth that he gave the church. Jesus wasn't trying to please everyone. Most of all, in presenting that gospel, he knew that a gospel and a salvation so broad that everyone could accept it would be so watered down that it would do no one any good. And so he spoke the truth, the harsh truth that would cause people to reject him. Coming down through the centuries to us today, we find that while there are still some who follow him, many are determined to oppose him. And that opposition is becoming strident. It's becoming more harsh with every day. In this nation, once one nation under God, in this nation which saw the people going to church regularly, we now have a society which is largely focused against the church. If you go to the coasts, you'll see that magnified many times over what we experience here in this community. But you'll see how determined people are to oppose Jesus. Biggest holiday of the year. We're going to celebrate Christmas every year. But people don't want to celebrate the one whose birth is supposed to be recognized in this event. Christmas is celebrated worldwide. Everybody loves the giving of gifts, the festive decorations, the general messages of peace and goodwill. But the one who's coming, we're supposed to be celebrating, will never win such a universal acceptance. And so, there are many people who love the season that have no affection for him, the one who came. So we ask this morning as we draw near to our Christmas celebration, what are you going to do with Jesus? We have as our invitation time this morning, will you receive him gladly, or will your life be in opposition to him?